Well, we have lots of news to talk about today. Let's start with this. There is now a U.S. federal class action lawsuit being brought against memory manufacturers Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron for colluding, allegedly, to bring about the RAMpocalypse, which we have seen absolutely destroying pricing for our PC gaming market, as well as others. Basically, anything with SSDs or memory in it, prices are absolutely skyrocketing with no end in sight. So what is the justification for this lawsuit? And remember, this is a lawsuit. This is not a conviction. So I'm describing what is being alleged here in the lawsuit. Also want to be clear, I am not a legal expert. I will link all my sources in the video description today if you want to follow up on this in more detail yourself. But the basic idea here is that because Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron together control the vast majority of all memory production globally, that if they, rather than acting competitively, instead collude on their choices of what memory types to produce, how much to produce, whether to expand production or not, that can be an unfair choice for how to interact, right? They're not behaving competitively in this market. Also, this lawsuit reminds people that there is a previous conviction in the earlier 2000s with these companies specifically for price fixing type practices. So there's already been criminal convictions against these companies for doing this type of thing in the past. Now, it's not the case that they're saying that the boom in demand for AI data centers and things like that is solely the fault of these memory producers, but it's that they are allegedly choosing to focus on producing, high bandwidth memory and not produce as much of the consumer type memory, even as prices for that is going up, where the lawsuit is alleging that in a competitive environment, at least one of these memory manufacturers should start to increase production on those consumer memories and things like that in order to take advantage of the price increase. And it's a competitive market, but instead it's alleging that they are colluding to keep prices high, to not expand production in ways that would have made sense in a truly competitive market. And like I said, bringing up the fact that these companies have been convicted of doing this type of price fixing behavior in the past. Like I said, I'm not a legal expert. I'm doing my best to summarize what I've been able to find about this, but you can follow the links in the video description to do your own research on what's going on here. Now, I don't know if anything will come of this, but there is at least this lawsuit now being filed. Now, this is in an environment where we have major players like Lenovo saying that DRAM prices will never be like last year again. Now, the source here, Computer Base, is mentioning that when they used the word never, it was an intentional exaggeration with laughter on the stage, but is really talking at least about the next 5 years and maybe beyond, reaching a new normal that will be significantly higher prices than what we were seeing in 2024 or 2025. Now, this is specifically in a talk kind of talking about more on if you're rolling out big server implementations and things like that, how to survive in this kind of new normal, and that they're not expecting things to get better. Now, I think it's also important to note that when we're getting these types of predictions from companies like Lenovo and others that produce computer systems, whether it's for consumers or in the server side of things, that they do have a bit of a interest in, how should I put this? If they're forecasting multiple years before things get better, it's helpful for them selling systems now. Because if they instead forecasted that things will be way better next year, then their customers may choose to wait a year and try to buy systems then. So I do think it's important always when evaluating these types of claims, it's true that Lenovo probably has more information on what's happening in this market and what contracts look like and long-term planning than somebody like me does. However, like I said, they also have that kind of conflict of interest to project bad pricing for multiple years, because otherwise it could impact current sales and incentivize people to wait. That being said, I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just saying it's always important to think about the sources you're getting information from. Now, when you're looking at things like SK Hynix and Samsung and Micron, colluding and controlling the global market, there's also been talks about China's CXMT actually building out additional capacity. And a lot of people have been hoping that this could mean that overall prices could be brought down. Well, we're starting to see reports coming out of Computex, et cetera, saying that when they talk to memory vendors, the cheaper DDR5 coming out of CXMT is essentially a myth, and that prices are matching what Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron are doing. So, in other words, there's signs that CXMT entering the market isn't necessarily going to drive prices down. It's just them trying to also capitalize on that higher pricing. Apple has been looking at sourcing iPhone 18 DRAM from CXMT, but the prediction there isn't that that would fix supply or pricing issues. But the idea is just to try to minimize shortage risk, not that this would actually fix the prices. And speaking of pricing, if you want to look at what does that look like for somebody like Apple? So they've been able to acquire DRAM and flash storage for around $40, but that same kit and they were able to then sell those upgrades for $99. However, now they're looking to be paying $200. So then what will they charge for that upgrade? So Apple is, as their, contracts that they had in place for a while are expiring, and they're having to look at sourcing new deals and things like that. Even big players like Apple are struggling here. And again, on the CXMT front, it's looking that they're also engaging in these long-term memory deals, in this case with Chinese companies like Tencent, but they're locking in long-term, multi-year, high-priced deals, just like your Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron. So, in other words, there's a couple of reasons why CXMT isn't just going to solve this problem for everybody. First of all, while they are looking to increase production and ramp that up, still that's going to be a small percentage of the overall global market. But then, like I said, as much as they're able to, I think they are also trying to lock in those high prices. Now, that's having huge impacts in gaming hardware, and I usually cover PC, but also in the console side of things. We're seeing that PlayStation's hardware unit sales fell to their lowest May total since May of 2000, while Xbox hardware unit sales were the lowest ever recorded for any May month in history. Looking like the average price paid for a new unit of video game hardware has reached $502 in May. That's up 14% compared to a year ago, where it was $440. And in May 2026, PlayStation 5 average pricing increased by 33% versus a year ago, up to $672, while Xbox Series is up 22% to $524. So that's huge increases. Now, there's some other interesting stats here coming from Matt Piscatella here. And in addition to the hardware stuff, they also talk about games, so maybe we could do a little sidebar here. It's interesting to track that year to date, their projected top 10 best-selling games ranked on physical and full game digital dollar sales, which excludes mobile and digital add-on content, which is important because that's where a lot of games make a lot of their money. But we have RE Requiem continuing in the #1 position, but interestingly, it looks like Crimson Desert is at #2. MLB The Show 26 is coming in at 3. But we actually have 007 First Light, despite launching later into the year, then RE Requiem and Crimson Desert actually looking like they're coming in at number 4 and actually ahead of Forza Horizon 6, which I actually wouldn't have expected that. Now, I have enjoyed both of those games, also enjoyed Resident Evil Requiem. Crimson Desert, I just played the first hour or so and it just didn't really click for me. Maybe if I give it another shot at some point, maybe it would hook me. I'm like that with some games, especially open world games. Oftentimes I kind of bounce off of them initially, but at some point revisit them and they click a little bit better. The May specifically, just looking at May of 2026 sales, does have 007 First Light at number 1 and Forza Horizon 6 at number 2. Subnautica 2, despite only being an early access launch, came in at number 4 with Lego Batman Legacy of the Dark Knight and at number 3. So interesting results here. There's some more stats you might want to look at. Like I said, sources will be linked in the video description. But getting back into the hardware sales and increased pricing, we see that Microsoft has done another increase to Xbox console pricing. Series X will now start at $749. That's absolutely crazy. And the Series S coming in at $499. Remember that throughout all of console history, it's always been the case that console pricing decreases over time. So all signs point to us being at the last year or two of this console generation, and yet prices are far higher than they were at launch, which is, it's just like I said, completely unprecedented to see this kind of thing where, not only have they been unable to just maintain pricing, in the past we would have seen decreased pricing at this point. Now, that all kind of then begs the question of what does that mean about next-gen console pricing? Is it going to be insanely high? Well, this is hardly official numbers, but we do have an estimate from a well-known leaker who does seem to have leaked things about PlayStation stuff in the past and had some accuracy around that. So make of it what you will, but PlayStation 6 bill of materials. Now remember, bill of materials is not necessarily the actual pricing that it will have on the market, because a company would pay its bill of materials cost, and then a console maker could choose to subsidize pricing and actually charge less than their bill of materials and actually take a loss on the console sales and hope to make that up in software sales and subscriptions. Or they could choose to actually make a profit on the hardware sales, in which case they would charge above the bill of materials cost, or they could try to just sell at cost. So there's a lot of things that could happen on the actual market pricing. But Kepler L2, the leaker who seems to have some sort of insider knowledge on these types of things, has leaked some things accurately in the past regarding PlayStation, is now saying that the bill of materials cost is up to near $1,000. This is a revision to his previous estimate back when prices weren't quite as high, saying that he had predicted a bill of materials estimate for PS6 at $760, and then projected that then Sony could choose to take a little bit of a subsidizing approach and hit a $699 launch price for the PS6, but that was back in March. He's currently been asked about this. Do you think it's still in this price range? And he has now said that the bill of materials went up by about $200 since he made that post. So that would mean jumping up to $960 bill of materials. So in that case, you'd be looking at more likely something around $1,000 launch price for the PS6 if component pricing doesn't have major changes between now and when it may launch in 2027, but it could have a delayed launch. We've seen that at investor meetings, PlayStation themselves have discussed kind of, I think, so I forget their exact wording, but playing around with launch timing, still trying to figure out what makes the most sense because of the component pricing. Just because if they have to launch at $1,000, that's rough. Now, there's also that question on, are they going to subsidize it? And there's actually some evidence in an investor call that they may not subsidize hardware for this next generation, which could then mean $1,000 plus launch pricing for PS6. So specifically in an investor Q&A session, there is a quote that gets into that. I'll read the whole quote, which doesn't all completely talk about the hardware subsidies because it's all pretty interesting. But the quote is, "We regard hardware as the base for providing the gaming experience, and by offering products such as the PlayStation Portal Remote Player, PS Portal, we aim to provide experiences tailored to users' playstyles beyond the living room, which has traditionally been considered the primary usage environment. As for pricing, it is not realistic for us to absorb all component cost increases, and we have already implemented some price increases outside of Japan. At present, however, sales are proceeding as planned, and we do not believe this has led to a decline in consumer demand." Now, I have to bring up the fact that I had just, talked about these quotes from Matt Piscatella saying that this is the worst May sales for a PlayStation console since the year 2000. So I don't know how up to date this. There's PlayStation quote is saying that we do not believe this has led to significant decline in consumer demand. I would suggest that maybe they're wrong about that, but they're not supposed to lie at investor stuff because it's an investor meeting. There's a lot of regulations around that. Anyway, they continue. "As a principle, we do not intend to sell hardware at significant losses." Now, notice they don't say they won't sell it at a loss, but not at significant losses. At the same time, we are carefully monitoring the market and continuing to evaluate our approach. We believe it is important for us to make every effort to ensure that customers fully understand the value we provide in relation to pricing. So in this quote, basically this does not rule out selling at some level of subsidized pricing, but they're not currently intending to sell at significant losses. So, if the bill of materials is approaching $1,000, I think us seeing something like a $500 or $600 console pricing would just be completely out of the question. And if they could subsidize it down to like $899, if their bill of materials is $960, maybe that's not out of the question. But I think seeing console pricing go up considerably next generation is definitely within the not just the realm of possibility, but definitely. I would say all safe bets would be on significantly higher console pricing next generation. And I think that's going to be rough. I think it's also going to lead to probably the longest cross-generational period that we've ever seen. Because with PlayStation 5 being still pretty relevant from a hardware perspective, I think that you could see a lot of games choosing to just continue to support previous generation consoles for many, many years. Because I think if PS6 launches anywhere near $1,000, I just can't imagine there being a huge install base for that anytime soon. And with tons of people choosing to just stay on the previous generation. Now, if you're thinking about playing older PlayStation games like PlayStation 4, but doing it on PC through emulation, there's an interesting update to the SHAD PS4 site with a blog post saying that there's great progress on their SHADnet. Now, what is SHADnet? This is an attempt to allow online play with, I think, other SHADnet users on PS4 games. Although, while they're saying there's great progress, it seems like at this stage, it's more like tracking scores versus like actually multiplayer gaming. But it looks like they're looking to continue developing this. So that's at least pretty interesting for, the state of PlayStation 4 emulation on PC. Now, on the Xbox side of things, there's some evidence that the new leadership at Xbox could be revisiting their thoughts on GamePass, and specifically with how much they're investing in third-party deals for games on Game Pass. But this is still in kind of the leaks and rumors territory rather than anything official. I found this at WCCF Tech, like I mentioned earlier in the video. All my sources for today's video will be in the video description. But this seems to be coming from the Business of Video Games podcast, specifically episode 59, where Fernando Rizzo from Caboodle Games talked about the conversations he had with fellow industry members at recent First Playable trade show, which was in Florence, Italy, earlier this month. Now, what he's saying is, I was at the trade show in Italy, had some nice lunches and dinners with industry colleagues, and word on the street was that loads of people who were in the frame for GamePass deals, with nothing inked yet, but the deals were in advanced discussions, and everybody got the rug pulled out from under them. So in other words, he's talking about people who hadn't finished deals yet with GamePass, but were at pretty advanced stages in those discussions. And everyone he talked to said that the rug got pulled out from them, meaning it seems like, at least in his opinion, based on the people he's talked to, he doesn't think Game Pass is over, given that the new leadership have talked a lot about Game Pass, but I think they're on pause. I think they're figuring it out. That's my reading anyway. But yeah, for the time being, it seems that way. Like, we just did one at Caboodle earlier in the year, and I get the feeling that we were among the last ones. Now, it could just be that the particular people that he happened to talk to was like a bad sample size, and maybe other people are still getting deals, so this isn't confirmed information on a change of plan for Game Pass, coming directly from Xbox. But there's certainly signs pointing to this potentially being another place that's at least being revisited by the new Xbox leadership on what they want to be doing with third-party deals and how much they're spending on it. Now, let's talk Steam Machine. So Steam Machine reservations went out. There was a randomized reservation system to try to cut down on bots just getting all of the early reservation deals and then just flipping those on eBay. But there's certainly at least some quantity of these reservations deals being flipped on eBay, selling for up to $2,900. Now, this is evidence that at least some people are going to be willing to pay a lot of money for Steam Machine, despite the lackluster specs for the price, because I think some people just think they're cool. Maybe other people are hoping to flip the pricing again or whatever. The point is that there's some number of people who have very deep pockets and can spend it on whatever hardware stuff that they think is cool, regardless of the kind of value on offer there. Now, speaking of the value that Steam Machine offers, there has been tons of discussion on what sorts of pre-builds or DIY builds offer better deals. But I want to mention that there's one going around that you should probably ignore because it seems to be fake, because the listing doesn't make sense. This was caught at videocards.com, saying that a alleged Steam Machine competitor that seemed to have a really attractive pricing, offering a Ryzen 5 5500 processor and an RX 6750 GRE 10GB graphics card and 16 gigabytes of DDR5 memory, for what seemed to be a fairly attractive price. If you look at that a little bit harder, you realize something doesn't make sense here. It's 16 gigabytes of DDR5 memory on a Ryzen 5 5500 processor, which doesn't support DDR5 memory. So maybe you could assume that they just accidentally typed in DDR5 instead of DDR4, but other things don't seem to make sense, like the RX 6750 GRE graphics card probably shouldn't fit in the size of case that they're talking about here. So there seems to be all sorts of issues. Now, this was listing at around $688 if you translate the pricing, where a lot of people were excited about this listing. But yeah, it seems too good to be true, but also just like those components shouldn't fit in that size of case. It shouldn't be compatible with DDR5 memory. So this just doesn't make sense. So I would ignore this listing and certainly don't try to buy it. Something seems wrong there. Now, we are starting to see this, interest in SteamOS devices lead to Meta PCs launching a Steamroller PC at $1,300, but it's a pre-built that will launch with SteamOS installed. So we could start to see more and more pre-built systems with SteamOS pre-installed for you, which is interesting. Now, this particular build, while it does beat the specs of the Steam machine, coming in at $1,300, I really don't like it. Given that, well, the CPU is significantly better than what we see in the Steam machine because it's a Ryzen 5 9600X, the GPU is still only a RX 7600, which is only slightly better than the 7600M type GPU that's in the actual Steam machine. So while this would offer something similar to what you'd get from a Steam machine, and a significantly better CPU performance, the overall GPU performance is only going to be very, very slightly better, which overall means I think at this price point doesn't make a lot of sense. I think that at this price point, I think if you're doing Steam machine competitor builds, especially if they're in larger cases compared to the actual Steam machine, they should come with like a 9060 XT GPU, in my opinion, at minimum, if you're going to be doing this kind of Steam machine competitor build where you're coming in at a higher price than the actual Steam machine. That's my overall thoughts on this kind of build, but there's some other competitors and things coming in that I think are maybe more interesting. Now, with the Steam machine reviews out and the pre-orders going on sale, a lot of people are wondering, what about the Steam Frame VR headset? Well, we're seeing signs that this should be coming pretty soon as well. We're starting to see Portal 2 get a playability rating on, the Steam verification, system. Now it's saying that the Steam Frame compatibility is saying that the game doesn't support Steam Frame's native display resolution, which may cause degraded performance, but that it is verified for all functionality is accessible when using the default controller configuration. The game shows Steam Frame controller icons. In-game interface text is legible on Steam Frame. This game's default graphics configuration performs well on Steam Frame. So we're still seeing that verification system kind of going into effect now for at least one game on the Steam Frame. Now, this being a Valve game might indicate that this is, less of a full rollout at this point, but some signs that the Steam Frame could also maybe be coming out soon. Maybe they wanted to roll out their Steam Machine reviews and get pre-orders going, but then maybe shortly later we'll be seeing the Steam Frame coming in. Now, switching to Grand Theft Auto 6, which has also been in the news a ton, there's been a lot of discussion over what will performance look like on consoles, and will it just be 30 FPS max on all systems? There's some evidence now that there could be a 60 FPS performance mode for PS5 and Series X, maybe Series S, but that's a lot more of a stretch. But there's may or may not have it ready at launch. Now, still, this is not official information. This is coming from a Polish gaming podcast, Rock and Boris, where we had some information shared in this. Apparently, the direct quote is that, but ladies and gentlemen, if you remember our previous episode, we mentioned that on the Polish Media Market website, the description for GTA 6 included information stating that PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X would have a choice between a performance mode and a quality mode. And I've now received new information from a source close to Rockstar, so we don't know who that is, right? It's undisclosed. But I want to stress that this is a single source, though a very credible one. And saying, so based on the information I received, there are supposed to be two graphical modes, 30 and 60 FPS on PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. On the Series S, for now, it's 30 FPS only, but from what I was told, they're working on it with a large team from Microsoft, so maybe there will be more options there too. And saying that why hasn't Rockstar announced the modes yet? From what I've learned, they don't have 100% certainty whether the 60 FPS mode will actually be there at launch. I mean, there's a possibility that, for example, it might arrive in a later patch. They're working on it, but as I was told, it will most likely be there at launch, though it's still there's still some serious crunch happening there. So obviously not completely official, but it sounds like there's at least a lot of work being done to try to get a 60 FPS mode ready at launch, and if it's not ready at launch, it could be potentially coming in a patch. But again, this is not officially from Rockstar. It's just how much credibility do you put into this guy's source who is close to Rockstar? Now, the other big story going around with GTA 6 has been whether or not there will be a physical disc after launch. It's already been confirmed that the initial launch would not have a physical disc, even in the physical copies you buy. It would just be a download code. However, there were then some rumors that there might be a later physical release that would have an actual physical disc, but it's looking like that now this has been denied by both Rockstar and Take-Two. Saying, this is coming from the Hollywood Reporter, although I found it at WCCF Tech, saying a source with knowledge of the plans told THR that at this point in time, there are no plans for GTA 6 discs to be printed, not at launch and not months after. So that is, again, still talking about one of these undisclosed sources, but that is lending support to the idea that no, even in the future, there will not be a physical disc, at least nothing planned at this time. Now, in a last few PC hardware news stories, we have another 5090 burned. This one seems to be some of the worst burn damage we've seen yet, and this one is showing up at a Vietnamese repair shop and saying that not only was this burned, but the warranty was rejected because burn damage is not covered by the warranty. Here's the direct quote through translation from GPU Fix, who was the repair shop that this was sent to, saying, a bit sad that a VGA card costing more than 100 million does not have an additional fuse designed by the manufacturer to prevent a short from causing the circuit board to burn through. But the warranty policy refuses fire and explosion cases. Fire and explosion are caused by the circuit and by faulty components made by the manufacturer, not by the user. And then they talk about how only EVGA had a good warranty that covered fire and explosion, etc. Anyway, so that's just more signs of power issues on 5090s. And now this one does seem to be a bit more extreme than what other people are seeing and what I saw on mine, for example, when my connector melted. But yeah, I think one of the biggest concerns with this is, first of all, I mean, just that there's still continuing to be problems. But then you have the warranty support. Like, I get mine replaced by NVIDIA because I get review samples from NVIDIA. So, of course, they listen to me because I have a big audience, and then they send that over as a replacement, and I'm not going through normal retail channels or, RMA systems and warranty claims. But for the end user who's spending thousands of dollars on a graphics card, to kind of be hit or miss on whether or not you might get warranty support when something burns through is what's really concerning about these situations. So that's a bit rough that this one, it seems, did not get warranty support. Now, like I said, this seems to be a bit more of an extreme case regarding what looks to be maybe actual fire having taken place as opposed to just hitting the PCB, as opposed to just the connector melting, which could be a little bit less of an extreme case. But yeah, I've seen some kind of hit or miss claims on whether or not warranties are being honored for these melting connectors, etc. Also in NVIDIA news, it seems like the reproduction or ramping back up of production on RTX 3060 12GB GPUs does seem to have expanded to Germany, where Hardware Lux, this is machine translated, does seem to be reporting that the RTX 3060 is back in a whole bunch of German stores, but prices starting at 333 euros, which is fairly expensive, especially compared to apparently these models were available last year in the summer at 245 euros. So while it's nice to get a 12GB card from NVIDIA back on the market at the lower end at 333 euros, how attractive that is, considering you could get, even though like cards like the 5050 have less VRAM, they're actually faster and coming in at a lower price. So if you tweak graphics settings enough, anyway, it is further signs that NVIDIA is increasing production again on the 3060 though. And last bit of news I have for you is that DXVK 3.0 is out, but Windows users who have RDNA 1 and 2 GPUs might want to avoid it. Now, DXVK I think is mostly used on Linux as a translation layer for, for DirectX into Vulkan. So it's nice to see that we're getting version 3.0 and there's various fixes, but there are some use cases where people do use this on Windows, and it's looking like the RDNA 1 and 2 drivers being kind of in a just like a legacy support mode, not getting feature updates, are showing that there could be performance issues if you use that, and you should stick to DXVK 2 versions. Or switching over to Linux if you're using DXVK. Some of the improvements, it looks like with version 3.0, looks to be some shader compiler changes, descriptor heap support for D3, D9 fixes, frame limiter and Intel GPU changes. But again, coming with that RDNA 1 and 2 warning, but that's for the Windows users due to the Windows drivers no longer getting feature updates. All right, that's what I've got for you guys in today's news video. Wow, looks like it ended up being a pretty long one. Hopefully you still found it useful and or interesting, and I hope all of you have an excellent day.